The wind came down from the high ridges in a steady, merciless sweep, pushing fine white snow through every crack in the weathered boards of the trading post. It whistled against the warped shutters, rattled the sign that read General Goods, and set the hanging lantern to swaying in slow, creaking arcs. Inside, the air was warmer but heavy, thick with the mingled scents of tobacco smoke, damp wool, and the faint sourness of spilled whiskey that had soaked into the floorboards years ago and never left. Silas Boone stood near the back, one boot propped on the rail of a low barrel, a rolled plug of tobacco between his teeth. He had the look of a man who had lived long with mountains for company, skin weathered, beard streaked with silver though his frame was still broad and unbent. His eyes were the pale gray of a winter sky, calm until stirred, and tonight they were fixed not on the shelves of beans and lamp oil, but on the commotion by the counter. 2 children stood there, a girl of perhaps 9 and a boy small enough to hide behind her skirts. The girl's dark hair was tangled, her cheeks hollow, but her eyes were sharp as a hawk's, scanning the room, weighing every face. The boy clutched a threadbare blanket to his chest, his small fingers working the frayed edge, eyes downcast. They were dressed in clothes that might once have been brown but had been worn down to a colorless thinness. The trader, a heavy-set man with red cheeks and a vest straining against his belly, slapped his palm on the counter. $6 for the both of 'em, he barked to no one in particular. Ain't got the patience nor the time to feed mouths that don't work. A prospector nursing a drink at the far table glanced over and shook his head. $6 for trouble, you mean? The girl's jaw tightened and she squared her shoulders. We can work, she said, her voice flat but steady. The trader chuckled without humor. Work don't fill a belly when there's no one to take you in. Come on. Someone here's got use for a pair of young ones. Else I'll send 'em on with the freight wagon come spring. Silas shifted, his boots making a quiet thud on the plank floor. He'd seen plenty of hard things in his time. Families lost to sickness, cabins burned, men gone under snow and never found. But something about the way the boy's hand gripped that blanket stirred something low and unwelcome in his chest. He didn't move right away. In truth, he didn't know why his legs carried him toward the counter. But the trader saw him and grinned. Boone, you got room up in them hills of yours, don't you? You trap enough fur to feed a whole town. $6 and they're yours. Hell, I'll even throw in an extra blanket. Silas met the girl's gaze. She didn't look away, though there was defiance there, as if daring him to take her. The boy peeked out from behind her hip, eyes wide and unreadable. $6 wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. He thought of the coin pouch in his coat. 6, the trader repeated. Or I haul 'em to Miles City and see what I get there. Silas pulled the pouch free, untied the leather thong, and dropped 6 silver pieces onto the counter. They rang sharp against the wood. I'll take 'em. The girl's eyes narrowed. Why? 'Cause I said so, Silas answered, tucking the pouch away. And you'll do as I tell you till you're old enough to do different. The trader slapped the coins into his vest pocket, muttering something about good riddance. Silas turned toward the door. Come on. They followed, the girl stiff-legged, the boy half-hiding in her shadow. Outside, the cold wrapped around them like a living thing. The snow squeaked under their boots as they crossed the yard to where Silas's pack horse stood waiting, steam rising from its nostrils. He tied the boy's small bundle of belongings, a blanket and a tin cup, behind the saddle, then jerked his chin toward the trail. We've a ways to go before dark. The girl kept pace with him easily, though she never stopped watching him. We ain't worth $6, she said after a while, her breath puffing white. Didn't say you were. Then why buy us? Silas didn't answer. The mountains loomed ahead, sharp against the gray sky, and the wind carried the smell of pine and snow. They walked in silence for some time, the only sounds the creak of leather, the jingle of tack, and the crunch of snow. As the light began to thin, a distant howl drifted down from the ridges. The girl glanced over her shoulder, the boy stumbled closer to her side. Silas's hand moved, without thought, to the rifle slung across his back. By the time the howls grew nearer, they had reached a narrow pass where wind funneled between walls of stone. The wolf appeared without warning, a rangy shape slipping from behind a drift, eyes glinting yellow. It paced them at a distance, head low, tail flicking. Silas stopped, shifted the rifle forward, and thumbed back the hammer. The report cracked sharp in the frozen air, and the wolf dropped where it stood, vanishing into the snow's pale wash. The boy whispered, "Thank you." Silas said nothing, but when they made camp that night under a stand of fir, he cut the wolf's pelt free and gave it to the children to wrap themselves against the cold. By the firelight, the girls studied him as he worked, skinning the deer he'd brought down earlier in the day. "You live alone?" "Mostly." "You got a wife?" "Had." He saw no reason to tell her more, but her eyes stayed on him, and the memory came anyway. Mary's pale face, the sweat on her brow, the stillness that had followed. The small bundle they'd laid in the ground beside her. The girl turned away, pulling the wolf pelt tighter around her shoulders. The boy curled up beside her, already half asleep. Silas watched the flames dance and thought of a long winter ahead. He had meant to ride the high ridges, trapping, keeping to himself, as always. Now there were two small mouths to feed, two sets of eyes, watching him like they expected something he wasn't sure he could give. The fire burned low, and the wind outside the lean-to sang through the trees. Silas rolled in his blanket, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. It was near midnight when a sound woke him, not the wind, not the pop of the fire, but a small voice. The boy was murmuring in his sleep, breath hitching between words. Silas leaned closer without thinking. "Pa, Silas." The name came out soft, almost a sigh, and then the boy drifted deeper into dreams. Silas froze, his heart thudding once hard. He stared at the child's face in the flickering light. Names didn't come from nowhere. They came from memory. And this one was his. He lay back, staring up at the dark roof of pine boughs. The fire cracked, throwing shadows across their faces. In the morning, he'd ask the girl about it. Or maybe he wouldn't. Some things had a way of coming out when the time was right. For now, he closed his eyes, but the boy's voice lingered in his ears, and the question burned quiet and steady in his mind. How could a child he'd never met know his name? The wind swept over the camp again, carrying with it the cold smell of the mountains, and Silas knew with a certainty as sure as the snow under his boots that this winter was going to change more than just the weather. Snow came in the night, heavy and wet, pressing the pine boughs low and muting every sound but the slow hiss of flakes settling on canvas and earth. When Silas woke, the world outside the lean-to had changed to a white blindness. His breath smoked in the cold air, and when he rose to stoke the fire, the boy stirred with a cough that cut sharp and dry. Maggie was already awake, her eyes following him like a wary fox as he moved about camp. The day's march was shorter than he'd planned. The snow thickened until it was near impossible to see more than a few yards ahead, and the wind, funneling through the ridges, knifed against their faces. They found shelter in a shallow cut between two rock faces, where Silas set the packhorse to one side, built a wall of snow for windbreak, and layered spruce branches for the ground. The girl helped without being asked, hauling what she could carry, while Eli crouched under the pelt and shivered. By nightfall, the storm had swallowed the sky, the clouds sagging low enough to hide the mountain tops. They ate thin strips of venison and drank water warmed in a tin cup. The fire popped, sparks leaping before the wind snatched them away. Maggie pulled Eli close, her hands rubbing his back as if she could warm him by will alone. "Cold gets in your bones out here. It'll stay all winter," Silas said, watching her. She didn't look up. "He ain't used to it." "He'll have to be." The words came out harder than he meant, but they were true. The mountains didn't care for weakness. Still, when Eli's coughing fit came again, Silas felt it like a small stone dropped in his gut. He reached for his pack, rummaged until he found a pouch of dried leaves and roots, and began brewing a bitter-smelling tea over the fire. "What's that?" Maggie asked, her eyes narrowing. "Something to help his chest? Learned it from a crow trapper long time ago." Eli took the cup without protest, too tired to resist. The steam curled around his pale face, and he sipped slowly, blinking against the heat. The storm broke by morning, leaving a clean, hard sky and drifts up to their knees. Travel was slower, each step a push against the snow's pull, but the air felt sharper, clearer. They pressed on through timber stands and narrow draws, the silence so deep it seemed wrong when a raven's cry echoed overhead. Maggie stayed close, matching Silas's pace, asking nothing until midday. "How far's your place?" "3 days, if weather holds." "You always live alone?" "Mostly." "Why?" Silas kept his eyes on the trail. "Ain't much up there, but work and quiet. Most folks don't like either for long." She thought on that for a while. "Pa liked quiet," she said at last. Something in her tone made him glance over. "Your pa, what was his name?" "Thomas Boone." She said it like she was testing him. He stopped in the trail, boots sinking into snow. "Boone?" She nodded, said, "We had kin somewhere up north. You know him?" Silas didn't answer right away. The name hit like a rifle shot. Thomas Boone, his cousin by blood, a boy he'd hunted with when they were both still too young to shave. They'd parted ways near 20 years back, Thomas heading east to start a family. Silas had never heard from him again. "Used to," Silas said finally. "Long time ago." Maggie's eyes searched his face, but she didn't press. They walked on, though Silas felt the weight of the truth hanging between them like a low cloud. That afternoon, he took her with him on the hunt, leaving Eli wrapped in blankets by the fire. The girl was eager, her breath visible in the cold, her hands steady as he showed her how to spot tracks in the snow's crust. They followed the signs of a deer for near an hour before catching sight of it, a buck, head low, picking at winter grass. Maggie lifted the rifle with care, but before she could settle her aim, a sound split the air, a low, throaty growl. The buck bolted, snow spraying behind it, and from the trees came the tawny flash of a cougar. It happened fast. The cat leapt, muscles rippling, eyes locked on them. Maggie froze, breath caught in her throat. Silas's rifle was up and firing before she could scream. The shot struck true. The cougar crumpled, a tawny heap against the white. Maggie stood staring, her small chest heaving. "Would have had me," she said finally, her voice thin. Silas nodded, slinging the rifle back. "Would have tried." They found the buck's trail again and brought it down before sundown. Maggie helped dress it, her hands red from the work, but there was a set to her jaw now that hadn't been there that morning. When they returned, Eli was curled tight, coughing into the blanket. His skin felt too warm when Silas laid a hand on his forehead. The tea helped some, but the heat in the boy's body told him sickness had already taken root. "We need a doctor," Maggie said, her voice low. "Closest is in town. Then we go to town." Silas didn't argue. The thought of traveling with the boy in this state tightened something in his chest, but staying meant gambling with his life. They set out before dawn. The trail to town cut through low timber, then down toward the river, a broad, icy span with water running fast under a skin of brittle ice. The only crossing was a narrow ford where the current split around a cluster of black boulders. The horse went first, picking its way across. Silas followed, with Eli wrapped in the wolf pelt against his chest, Maggie close behind. Halfway over, her boots slipped on the slick rock, and she went down hard, water rushing over her legs. She cried out, the current dragging her sideways. Silas lunged, catching her arm with his free hand. But the river's pull was strong, nearly tearing her from his grip. For a breathless moment, all three were in danger. Eli pressed between them, Maggie thrashing, the horse sidestepping nervously on the rocks. "Hold on!" Silas roared, hauling her up with every ounce of strength. Water streamed from her hair and skirt, her teeth chattering by the time they reached the far bank. They made camp early that night, drying clothes by the fire. Maggie sat close to Eli, feeding him sips of tea. Her lips were blue, but she didn't complain. "You almost drowned," Silas said quietly. She glanced up at him. "You didn't let me." He turned away, tending the fire, but her words stayed with him. By the time the town's lights flickered through the trees 2 days later, Eli's cough had deepened to a rasp that made Silas's own chest ache to hear. He carried the boy into the doctor's office, the smell of camphor and lamp oil sharp in the warm air. The doctor, a thin man with spectacles perched low on his nose, examined the boy with brisk hands. "Pneumonia," he said. He'll live, but he needs warmth, rest, and steady food. Silas paid in furs, the thick winter pelts he'd meant to trade for supplies. Maggie watched the transaction in silence, her gaze moving from the doctor's hands to the pile of hides to Silas's face. When the doctor left them alone, she spoke. "Why'd you do that?" "What? Trade all that. You need it." Silas studied her for a long moment. "He needs it more?" Maggie nodded slowly, as if something had settled in her mind. She moved to sit beside Eli, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. They stayed in the boarding house that night, the three of them in a small upstairs room that smelled faintly of coal smoke and boiled potatoes. The bed sagged in the middle, the quilts patched and worn, but the fire in the grate burned hot. Silas lay awake long after the children had fallen asleep, the sounds of the street below drifting in through the thin walls, the jingle of harness, a shout from the saloon, the distant clatter of hooves on frozen earth. He thought of Thomas Boone of Bloodlines and Kin, and of the boy whispering his name that first night. Eli shifted in his sleep, curling toward him. Maggie, in the narrow bed beside them, breathed slow and even. Silas watched them both, the weight of the road behind and the unknown stretch ahead pressing against him. The mountains would still be there when they returned, but he knew now they'd return different. The storm, the hunt, the river, they'd bound the three of them together in ways neither snow nor time could loosen. And somewhere in that truth, a new kind of burden had taken root, one he was no longer certain he wanted to lay down. The morning came with a gray light seeping through the frost-laced window, the kind of dimness that promised snow before sundown. Silas woke to the low crackle of the great fire and the weight of a small hand resting against his arm. Eli was still asleep, his breathing easier now, though a faint rattle lingered beneath it. Maggie was already up, kneeling by the fire, coaxing the coals into life with careful hands. "You're up early," Silas said, pulling on his boots. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd keep the fire warm." There was no defiance in her voice this morning, only a quiet resolve. She was changing, and he knew the same could be said for himself. The old life, his solitude in the high timber, felt like it belonged to another man. The sound of boots on the stairs drew his attention. A moment later, the door opened without a knock, and the trader from the post stepped inside. He looked the same, vest straining, face flushed, eyes sharp as a crow's, but there was something harder in his manner now. "You got my kids," he said flatly. Silas stood, his stance shifting without thought. "You sold em." "I didn't sell em proper. Just lent em to you, till I found a better buyer. That buyer's in town now, ready to take em off your hands for 10 times what you paid." Maggie's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "We ain't going anywhere." The trader ignored her. 10 minutes, Boone. Bring em to the livery, or I'll bring the sheriff." "You do that," Silas said, stepping closer. "But understand, these two don't belong to you any longer. That deal was done." The trader's smile was thin. "We'll see who the law listens to." When the door shut behind him, Maggie crossed the room, fists clenched. "He can't take us, can he?" "Not while I'm breathing," Silas said. It didn't take long for the trouble to come. Less than an hour later, Silas heard shouting in the street below, followed by the heavy tread of boots on the stairs again, more than one pair this time. He motioned for Maggie to get behind him, then opened the door to find the trader flanked by 2 rough-looking men, both armed and wearing expressions that made their intent plain. "You coming quiet, Boone?" one asked. "Not today." The first man stepped forward, but Silas moved quicker. His fist caught the fellow under the jaw, sending him stumbling back into the wall. The second lunged, swinging a short club, but Silas caught his arm, twisted hard, and drove him into the doorframe. Maggie darted forward and slammed the door, shoving the latch home. The trader cursed outside. "You just made yourself a problem, Boone." Silas turned to Maggie. "Get Eli's boots on. We're leaving." They slipped down the back stairs, out into the narrow alley where the morning air bit like ice. Silas led them toward the far end of town, keeping to shadows until they reached the stable. The horse snorted when he appeared, stamping against the cold. He saddled quick, lifted Eli into place, then helped Maggie mount behind him. "Hold on tight," he told her. They rode hard out of town, the snow beginning to fall in thick, lazy flakes that quickly blurred the rooftops behind them. The road ahead wound between bare cottonwoods, the river running dark and fast to their right. Silas knew they couldn't outrun every man in town, but they could vanish if they reached the tree line before the storm closed in. By mid-afternoon, the snow thickened, stinging against their faces. The wind picked up, bending the trees, driving drifts across the trail. They stopped only long enough for Silas to wrap the children in extra blankets, then pushed on toward a stand of pines where he knew there'd be shelter. They found it as dusk deepened, a hollow beneath the rock face, shielded from the wind. Silas built a small fire, enough for warmth but not to draw attention. The children huddled close, eating what little jerky he had left. "You think they'll follow us?" Maggie asked. "Not if they've got sense," Silas said. "This storm will wipe the trail clean before morning." But he knew sense wasn't always what drove men like the trader. The night passed without incident, though Silas slept light, waking at every sound. When dawn broke pale and cold, they set out again, heading north toward the mountains. It would be slower going now, with Eli still weak, but each mile between them and town eased the knot in his chest. They were less than half a day from his cabin when they came upon a sight that made Silas pull up short. A thin thread of smoke curling into the white sky, coming from the direction they were headed. Maggie's grip on the saddle tightened. "That's your place, ain't it?" He nodded, scanning the tree line. Smoke alone might have meant nothing. He kept the chimney banked in winter, but this was too much for a bank fire. It was the kind of smoke that carried the sharp bite of burning wood and pine pitch. He urged the horse forward, heart pounding harder with each yard. The smell reached them first, acrid and choking. Then they saw it, his cabin, the roof caved in, flames licking along the walls, the snow around it trampled with boot prints. Maggie let out a small sound, half gasp, half growl. "They found us." Silas swung down, helping her and Eli off the horse. The fire was too far gone to fight. The heat drove them back before they could get close. Everything he'd built, years of work, was turning to black ash before his eyes. "They want you to have nothing," Maggie said quietly. Silas looked at her, at Eli leaning against her side. "I've still got something." The wind shifted, and from the trees came the sound of a branch snapping, too heavy for snow. Silas dropped into a crouch, scanning the woods. A shadow moved between the trunks, then another. "Back to the horse," he told them. The first shot came a breath later, splintering bark above his head. Silas fired back, the report echoing through the trees. Maggie pulled Eli toward the horse, but a man stepped from the brush to block them, a pistol in his hand. Before he could aim, Silas was on him, driving a shoulder into his chest. They went down hard in the snow, the pistol skittering away. The man clawed at him, but Silas drove a fist into his jaw, then another until he went limp. A second man charged from the opposite side, club raised, but Maggie, quick as a striking snake, snatched up the fallen pistol and fired. The shot went wide, but close enough to send him stumbling back. Silas swung the rifle up, sighted, and dropped him before he could recover. The woods went quiet again, save for the crackle of the burning cabin. Silas lowered the rifle, breathing hard. Maggie's hands shook as she set the pistol down. "You did good," he told her. They didn't linger. The horse carried them away from the smoking ruin, deeper into the mountains where the snow swallowed their tracks. By the time full dark fell, the wind had covered any sign of their passage. They found refuge in a small line shack used by trappers in spring, a one-room shelter with a stone hearth and a roof that kept most of the snow out. Silas got a fire going while Maggie settled Eli on the bunk. The boy was pale, but smiling faintly, his eyes on the flames. "We'll stay here till weather clears," Silas said. "Then we'll see about building new." "Not back there," Maggie said firmly. "They'll come again." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Someplace better then." The days in the shack passed slow, but steady. The storm raged outside, piling snow against the door, but inside they were warm. Maggie learned to set snares, Eli's cough faded, and Silas began to picture a life not of solitude, but of something harder and better, something worth the fight. It was the third night, when the sound woke him again. Not wind, not snow shifting on the roof, but the sharp crack of wood outside. He grabbed the rifle, signaling Maggie to keep still. Opening the door crack, he saw movement against the white, a flicker of lantern light, the shape of men closing in. They'd been followed after all. Silas stepped out into the cold, rifle up. "Turn around and go," he called, voice carrying over the wind. A voice answered, mocking, "Not without what's mine. Then you'll die in the snow." The first shot from the dark whined past his ear, and Silas returned fire, the muzzle flash lighting the night. The figures scattered, one falling, another vanishing behind a drift. The third pressed forward, shotgun in hand. But Maggie was there in the doorway, the trader's pistol braced in both hands. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him into the snow. Silas moved fast, closing the distance, wrenching the shotgun away. The man struggled, but a rifle but to the jaw ended it. When the last of them was down or fled, Silas dragged their weapons into the shack, bolting the door. Maggie stood by the fire, her face pale but set. Eli clung to her skirt, eyes wide. "They won't quit," she said. "Then neither will we." In the morning, they buried the bodies beneath the snow, marked only by the rifles crossed atop them. Silas knew spring thaw would take them, but by then, they'd be long gone. They left the shack before noon, heading higher into the mountains. The storm had broken, leaving the world sharp and bright, the air so clear it seemed to ring when they spoke. They traveled light, carrying only what they could pack, moving toward a place Silas knew, an old trapper's valley far from any trail. By sunset, they reached it, a wide meadow ringed with spruce, a frozen creek winding through its center. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that felt like safety. Silas dismounted, lifting Eli down, then Maggie. "This'll do," he said. Maggie looked around, her breath clouding in the cold. "Feels like it's ours." "It is," Silas said. They built a small camp that night, firelight throwing long shadows on the snow. As Eli slept, Silas and Maggie sat close to the flames. "You could have left us in town," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "Didn't want to." "Why?" He met her gaze, the firelight catching in her dark eyes. "Because family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's who you fight for." She didn't answer right away, but her hand found his in the space between them, a small, steady weight. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright. The wind moved through the trees like a slow song, and for the first time in many winters, Silas felt the ground beneath him as something solid, something to stand on. The world would keep coming, with its storms and its thieves and its fire, but here in this hidden place, they would meet it together. And that was enough.